So with the agenda today, we want to talk a little bit about kind of the phases of a breach in terms of detection, investigation, and response, and some of the information we have around that particular area. I'll cover that aspect from the operations perspective, and then after that, I'll hand off to Michael. Michael's going to cover the complexities of the real world and how Endace works with Palo Alto Networks to better identify in the detect phase, right, investigate, and then respond to breaches, and how their technology really provides extreme visibility into the life cycle, if you will, of an attack. From the start to the finish, and in helping to respond faster and ultimately close the investigation faster, so you reduce the issues around that. So let's get on with our topic here. I'm sure everyone's waiting there. So looking at the just kind of the overview of attacks, right, the onslaughts that we're getting, there's 5 primary areas that we seem to see out in the wild for various types of attacks. And the first one is you'll see stuff with internet-based reconnaissance and a direct attack. Now, and these are in no particular order in terms, because we know that phishing emails, for example, are the highest mode of successful attack, with some sort of email coming in with a target and whatnot, bad attachment, bad links, etc. But I think from the internet perspective, we have to understand that we do have people knocking on our door all the time. As soon as you connect to the internet, it happens. We also know that, for example, an unprotected Windows system out there is usually discovered within about 10 minutes and compromised within about 30. So there's a lot of action going on. Phishing emails, of course, come across every day, all day. Seems like all the time. We have a lot of technologies to filter them out, but there are still some to get through. Additionally, when we're out researching whatever it is we're researching, surfing the web, entertaining ourselves, etc., multiple types of malicious websites, bad links, malvertising in our social media, and many other things like that. And then we have the issue with rogue software. Whether it's an intentional or unintentional download that we get, we have something that gets on our system and begins to cause a problem, opening up an attack surface, then being able to be exploited. And then lastly, we have the tainted programs, especially the, hey, would you like to throw a pie in the face of your least favorite political person, or whatever it is, and download those types of things, and then end up with some goodie in the background, a Trojan horse of some kind that causes a problem on our system. So we see these throughout our days, and we have to be ever vigilant to try and avoid them. But none of them are perfect, and so sooner or later, we'll click on a bad link somehow, be tricked into it, etc. And so it's important to understand, what can happen next. Once we've done the thing to trigger the attack, allowed it in somehow, we usually see one of these primary means of insertion of malware or insertion of attack. We had the duped insider, so you whether it was from a phishing mail or whatever, you clicked on a link, you now have become suckered into whatever this situation was, and you're the patsy, if you will. We also have poor coding practices. We have apps out there that were not programmed well. They leak data. They expose us either from a mobile perspective or from our laptops, desktops, etc. Of course, mispatches, we see that all the time. Malicious website, we talked about those. Poor change management. I've definitely seen in my career, I've seen a situation where a change was made allowing a third-party vendor to come into the environment to make a change on a system, and then the person that was responsible for re-enabling firewall rules and re-enabling the router configurations and things like that, and all the other controls to keep that from happening, didn't do it, and so ultimately that system was compromised by an external threat, and it was a problem, right? So that was a serious issue. We see compromised identity. Identity is a very common thing, whether it's anything from shoulder surfing to grabbing your identity off your system after you click on a bad link, etc. Then unfortunately we have the malicious insider that has some sort of agenda, whether he wants the data or they disgruntled with the company, etc. And then lastly, I wanted to add the DDoS as a smokescreen, because we see DDoS quite commonly now of various sizes. We've been escalating over the last few years, but usually at this point, DDoS in and of itself isn't the only goal. It's to use that as the, hey, look at the left hand here and I'm waving my hand, but really the right hand is getting ready to do a sucker punch on you, and they're trying to get in via another avenue or door. Michael, I'm sure you've seen some things. What have you guys seen in your area?
Yeah, it's interesting. We're seeing a lot of wide variety of stuff, but the complexity of the threats is what's really intriguing to us, because a lot of the threats that are happening are taking much longer to manifest and actually come to life, so to speak, where they'll be seeding and they'll do days or even weeks of surveillance and reconnaissance before then they potentially go into their destructive mode. So we'll talk more about that later as we get into that section.
Excellent. So with the Threatscape today, I agree with you 100%. We are seeing an increase in not only volume, but that sophistication of attack. And for the ones you talked about specifically, absolutely, they'll get in, and the get in part is very quick, right? It just takes literally a couple of clicks on the worst case scenario they're in. But then they want to watch and see what's going on. They understand that we have defenses in place, whether it's endpoint defenses, whether it's DLP, firewalls, whatever the case is. And they're trying to identify what our defenses are and identify where data is moving, where people are going, ultimately, so they can have the best shot at getting as much as they want. Right? They want to maximize their value of that landing spot. Additionally, we absolutely see that they're getting past the filtering, the prevention systems, and other detection tools. Endpoint detection, of course, it's a big thing. You need like 5 different kinds of endpoint protection so that you can ultimately stop someone from getting on your endpoint. It seems to be a common issue. Additionally, I think what we run into on that third bullet with the security tools lacking context is they operate in silos many times. So my endpoint might know something, my DLP might know something, my firewall has a bit of information, my IDS, whatever the case is, right? They all have these pieces of information, but they look at them oftentimes in their own data silos, which creates issues. And we don't get a full picture. We think, oh, well, this wasn't a significant issue. My IDS saw it, but if I just look at that, okay, it doesn't look very big. But then I start, can I add all the pieces together to get that full context of what's going on? The thing that drives the most delay, in my opinion, is the manual effort that's involved with trying to get all of those pieces together to create that context. Because then I have to go to my firewall, I have to go to my IDS, I have to go to all these different things, collect that information together if I don't have the proper tools, and now I've pieced this together. And we see that there's a lot of issues going on around detection, and we'll talk about some of the time frames and things like that, which many of you have probably heard of. But that really creates a problem because we have these data silos in our security organizations, and it may even be that the network guys have some and the security guys have some and the systems guys have some, and with larger organizations they can be very, very segmented, which creates a huge data problem from that perspective. And ultimately, these all drive the issue around taking months to identify an issue and taking even longer to ultimately contain it and remediate it. And again, we'll talk about some of those. And this all comes back to these data silos and the lack of context that we have. So some of the challenges that we have around starting with the detection phase and moving through investigate and respond, and to do this faster. I mean, I've got some stats here which I think are very, very relevant. 64% of organizations, right? Organizations can't address 64% of their alerts. So there's a lot of alerts falling on the table that they just have to ignore. And the other problem is that 52% of those are classified as critical or severe. So how do you deal with over half of your tickets, and in some cases even more than that, all looking like they're the worst thing and you have to address them right now, right? There is no way to do that from a manual perspective. And then on top of that, of all the alerts you get, 31% are false positives. So now you have all these things that come in looking like they're critical that you have to address. You start digging into them and find, oh, that's a false positive, dead end, throw it away. What's the next one, right? And so 1 out of 3 of these things essentially are a red herring. And so we're wasting a lot of time around that, trying to move forward, and we can't. So ultimately, to deal with it, we have to reduce our false positives. We have to figure out how to properly prioritize that alerts, and both of those come back to context. And then lastly, we have to be able to quickly triage and understand the scope of it and deal with it. And I think that falls into context as well. So if you think about the 3 main issues that we're having, they all come back to how do we get better context in order to address them faster. So when we look at a typical breach, right, it's kind of sad that we think that when we made this research, we found out that 42% of organizations said, we're highly doubtful to only somewhat confident that we could actually detect a breach, right, an important issue before it caused significant impact. So almost half of us said, we're not really confident we can actually identify this before it really bites us. And so that's an issue, right? So what do we do? Well, first, we have to organize an incident response team. One of the things that I have found in both in operations in real life as well as in research, which is great that they correlate, right? We like that when they actually correlate. is that a lot of organizations have not had incident response teams. It's almost like the discussions around backup and recovery and those types of things, disaster recovery, let's say 10 years ago. Nobody had a backup and recovery plan unless you were a cutting-edge organization. We couldn't afford it, whatever the reason is. And incident response has been like that too. But in the last 2 or 3 years, we're seeing people really understand you have to have an incident response team organized and the processes drawn up and the technology there before it actually happens, because once that happens is the problem. Right? And how do we actually conduct investigations and collect enough forensic information to provide the root cause analysis? For example, both the Target and the Home Depot breaches, which are two of just many that we've had, the significant portion of the cost there was actually having someone come in and provide the literally 8 months to a year's worth of investigation at what, $300 an hour or whatever it is now, $500 an hour, to provide that investigation and come up with a root cause. And they didn't have the proper information to get them where they needed to be ahead of time, right? Target had said, well, we had alerts that we turned them off because there were too many false positives and too many alerts overall. Home Depot, I think their logging was truncated at a certain period of time, and they didn't detect it before the logs were thrown away. But these are all issues, right? Next, how do we determine the probable breach victims? This is a huge issue in terms of scope, both internal to the company, who was actually attacked and who was compromised, and also if there's a successful breach, who on the outside of the company do we have to notify? Right? This is a huge aspect, and then what goes along with that is all of the public relations, public outreach, and the legal issues, and all those things that have to go on to make sure you're following the various compliance laws internationally. Right? Because many companies in the U.S. also touch customers over in the EU, and so now you have GDPR and those types of issues you have to deal with. After that, you have all the documents and other types of information that you have to put together ultimately to pass out to the people, and credit reports and all those kind of things. And then lastly, one of the things that really helps, I think, a lot is identifying and implementing the call center procedures that you're going to be able to you're going to have to deal with, not be able to, you're going to have to be able to deal with for those incoming questions. Because ultimately, once you put out that notice that you were breached and Mr. and Mrs. Customer, you have a problem, we're sorry about that, you're going to start getting calls. And whether that's just, what do I do, or whether that's from lawyers, those are two different levels, but they happen, right? So these are things you have to prepare for. So, some breach facts. If you've looked at the Monahan report around this, cost of breach worldwide is only about $3 million, but in the U.S. it's almost $8 million per incident. It takes an average 200 days roughly to identify the breach. If you think about that from a time perspective, that's huge. Right? That almost two-thirds of a year to identify the fact that, hey, yeah, we were breached. This person or entity has been in our network, sucking up data, as Michael said earlier, just watching things, seeing what's going on, and really start data around for 200 days. And then after that 200 days, after that, you have another 52 days to actually resolve and contain it. So we identify the fact someone was there at day 201, let's say, and then at day 253, we have it boxed up, contained, we've got the intruder out, and we've got our systems restored and that kind of thing. And then on top of that, we've got this issue of for every record that was stolen, you're talking about roughly $154 in cost, both indirectly from identification and cleanup and so forth, to indirectly with credit coverage, notifications, and legal issues and things like that. So where does that take us, right? If we end up with, so my slide's not advancing there. There we go. There we go. There it is. So if we look at this from a cost perspective and look at that at 253 days, it's about $218,000 per week for a breach, right? That comes out of $31,000 a day, and then about $1,300 an hour. So this puts it into real sense and real money from a point of how fast can we identify and get this done? Can we do it better than we're doing it now? And in this case, time is money, right? Because every moment you give them another record stuck out the door, it only costs you dollars. Into dollars we can put into our heads. I mean, if you think about $8 million, that's huge. But if you think about that in terms of what does it cost me if I don't have an incident response team, if I don't have the proper data and I can't respond, it's about $1,300 an hour. right? Which is it's actually probably about that expensive to hire somebody to come in and do your forensics. I think I said 500 before, but something in my head tells me that's way too low because I have never had to hire anybody that way, and I think they cost a lot more now. But that's where we want to be. Right. So ultimately, some of the things that the Monahan study identified that I think are very important is if you do have the incident response team in before the breach, right, you can reduce your losses by $14 per record. And if you think about the breaches like Anthem and some of the others that were multiple millions of records, right, that's a huge sum. It's not just $14. It's 14 times the number of records. So when you're talking about 7 million records, right, you're now talking about $90 million in potential savings. Additionally, for the organizations that were able to actually get their breach identification down below 100 days, they were saving more than $1 million, per incident. Right? So there's another savings. And that's on top of having your incident response team. Additionally, if you're able to contain it, that 52 days, right? If you're able to take that down below 30, there's another $1 million. So these are not trivial numbers. And it comes back to having the correct data at the correct time and being able to leverage it and to ultimately come through with that detect, investigate, and then respond. All right, so I'm going to come down to brass tacks on this with I think packet capture is a phenomenal way to ultimately gain your context. If you think about this, virtually every attack has to come through the network. There's only a very small microcosm of an insider threat situation that will never cross a network boundary, right? So if I physically have access to the system where the data resides, I don't have to go across the network. I plug in a thumb drive and I do my thing and I go, right? So there are access logs, other things that can help us there. But for every other kind of attack, whether it's email-based, web-based, whatever it is, it has to go across the network. Right? And so when we think about the ability to capture that information, we have a couple of options. We have packet capture and we have flow data. And both have their uses and both can be valuable. But I think that if we look at the stack here, we see that the packet capture gives us a lot more visibility and context because you get the full information about what's going on for every communication that happened across the network. It's not a summary. So the network flows are great for doing trends and volumes and things like that because they're summaries. The tools there, you can get free tools for that, and they don't take a lot of storage because they are summaries, but ultimately you're sacrificing detail for that lower cost and convenience and storage. Again, very good for certain things, but not as good for a breach detection and a breach analysis because you don't get the detail. Whereas in the full packet capture, I can do full threat hunting. I can troubleshoot also applications and faults that are going on there. So it's not just good for security, right? We have other performance issues and application issues we can track. But I like the fact that if you have packet capture installed and you're using it on a continuous basis, even if you have to only keep it for X amount of time and then roll it over with your storage, right? If you have to do that, that's okay because you still have a much larger window where you can identify the 0 days that have come in. Then you can rerun those packets to say, oh, well, I think I missed something because we had an update, a week ago. Let's rerun some of those packets through and see if there's anything detected. So you can run that historical analysis as well to try and identify something that may have come in before you had enough visibility from your other tools. And then lastly, with the post-event reconstruction, that's a huge one as well. I can sit down and I can see everything that happened between the target host and the source host and what that communication was. I can actually see which data got pushed out, which information got pushed in for the attack, and I can construct, reconstruct, and deconstruct all of those things, right, the mode of this attack. And so this is a fantastic way to ultimately gain that context and visibility that you're not going to get with just an endpoint log or an application log. And the other thing that goes on top of that is you have this situation where you have this improved context, but you have it out front. Right? If you think about waiting to the end for the endpoint to say, hey, by the way, I just saw someone bang on the door, they've already gotten past the outer boundaries, they've gotten past the mid-range, and they're all the way at the end where the data is. You don't want them to get that far before you identify them. So we really have to improve context. And with some research we've done, 60% of organizations said, hey, look, we've got this information and we're able to identify the true false alerts versus the critical issues, and this is great. right? But only 60% of the organizations have actually said we're realizing this, right? We've got this technology, and now we've understood where we've kind of fallen short in the past. And so that's 40% that haven't been able to take advantage of that yet. And I think that's hopefully the 40% that we're reaching out to here to say this is why this is important, right? To get to the finish line and ultimately be able to do that faster and win the race, if you appreciate the analogy. Ultimately, if you do wait for your other detection technologies to flag you, I like this picture because the horse has left the barn, right? The person's already in, the attacker's already in, they've already gotten to your endpoint, they've already gotten some data, and now they're trying to get it out. And the question is, did you actually catch all of it from the moment they started, or did you miss anything in the beginning? And if you missed something in the beginning, right, that's gone. You're not going to be able to retrieve that without ultimately, if you're lucky, being able to go through some kind of legal action. But in most cases, as we well know, the organizations that are doing this are starting from countries that don't have any reciprocity, don't have any legal arrangements with them. So you're pretty well done. So you don't want to just wait for the bells and whistles and alarms to go off, once somebody's actually inside the gates and they're already doing their business. You want to try and catch them as close to the edge as you possibly can, and as early as in the cycle. So some of the data that we just pulled out, I mean, this is literally fresh off the presses, if you will. I haven't even presented the webinar around this report yet, but this 45% of organizations, are using. So when we're using packet capture, it's the most valuable thing that we have for accelerating incident response. Okay, but the scary part is on the left side there, only 23% of organizations saying they're actually able to investigate all of their critical security incidents. So we've got this gap in there, if you will. So 23% say we're investigating everything, and there's multiple reasons why I don't really have time to go into on this particular webinar. But of the ones that are investigating them all, right, we've got for the network packet capture is the best thing that we have, and you can see how the list kind of goes down from there. There's lots of tools being involved, analytics, endpoint, flows, etc. But so I think it's important to understand here that the people that are being most successful are really using packet capture as a huge advantage to accelerate that incident response and get to the end faster. Right? Early detection, early response. There we go. When you look at the situation of comparing endpoint versus packet capture, I find that over the course of my career, this has been like that old beer commercial, tastes great, less filling, and it was, I can do one, I can do the other, I can't do both, and I'm like, well, why not, right? It's more like a Reese's peanut butter cup. Put them both together, and you get two great tastes. But absolutely, the packet capture is fantastic for identifying that early. And we got 66% of respondents that said they had a preference, okay, for endpoint or packet data when they're trying to solve a problem, and packet data they thought was the way to go. Earlier detection, more information, and again, and I'm not trying to downplay the value of endpoint data, because I absolutely believe that there's great information you can get and detail you can get. But again, I like to push that upstream earlier in the process, earlier in that attack cycle, so ultimately I can detect it sooner. When you use packet capture for investigation, 81% of the organizations that we talked to said they either had packet capture or they wanted to implement it. And you saw earlier the other sign. So it's really about half and half. We've got a lot of folks that have realized the value and that they have a gap there and they want to implement that, and it's important to them. And so that's on their plan or agenda for security. And again, I think that the important thing to look at here also from a packet capture perspective is it's not just for security. There are absolutely a myriad of operational needs and roles that you can fill using packet capture. So it's not just to identify the guy running with the money, like on the right-hand side here. It's the application issues and the network performance and other things that you can do with it as well that will really improve your operations overall. So how do we change that operational paradigm? I think that it's important with packet capture, we can not only see the alert, but we can also get all the detailed information about the transactions that were going on. We can piece together the various stages, and it doesn't all have to happen at one moment in time. So it's important that we store this data for some period of time, and you have to figure out for your organization how long you want to do that. I think 30 days is a great window, and I'm sure Michael has some thoughts on that as well that he's going to share. And in this case, more is better, right? Storage is cheap today, so the more we can do, the longer we can store that information, the more insights we can get and it's easier to use that for the historical analysis of going back and saying that I missed something before because I have new updates, new tools, etc. Right? And so, the question is, when you get that, is there some data still missing? Well, if you have all the packets, you know you have the vast majority of it. Yes, there are some other pieces of information you can get from system logs, location logs, etc. But I think ultimately for the single-stop shopping, if you will, you're going to get more visibility into what actually happened off of that packet capture, that data, right? So you can extract the information, you can apply analytics to it, you can get the full context, and ultimately, I think, move yourself along faster towards that desirable endpoint of identifying or detecting, investigating, and then ultimately responding. I think the key here that I bring out at the bottom is without packet capture, you're looking at hours to days. And we're seeing that, right? The IBM and Monahan report shows that we're talking 200 days before people, on average, which means somebody's way out there in the years, right? And there's others that are using packet capture that are down in the minutes range, right? We're seeing that as it comes in the door, we're identifying it, and we're ultimately able to stop it much, much significantly faster. So I put together this particular chart based on the various modes of attack I mentioned earlier. Right? So we had all those things that we talked about, and if you look at the commonality here, there are various different ways you can address each of these problems, whether it's user training or modifying processes and creating automation or whatever the case is. But I think it's important to note that every single one of these can be addressed by a single solution, which is the network packet capture and so you're providing visibility, you're able to apply analysis to that. And I think that's an important aspect as well, right? It's not just capturing the packets. I can capture a lot of stuff and put it in a box and never use it, and it provides no value to me. So ultimately, aside from capturing those packets and having them as you kind of in your back pocket, you also need to have the analytics capabilities to use that data, because if you can't use it again, what value is it to capture packets just to put them there if you can't actually use them? Right? So I think it's important to note that every one of these scenarios can be addressed through capturing packets and ultimately being able to apply analysis to them to do the job. So visibility provided by network data, kind of summing it up, right? We get early warning of attacks and breaches. As they start, we start gathering telemetry on them. We get early identification of lateral movement. If something does get in via a single click kind of situation, we now can see that moving out through the organization, provided we have the capture in the correct areas as that is moving laterally. Right? I mean, that is a key area. If I only have my packet capture at the edge of the network and I don't put it between the trust zones, if something's moving laterally within my boundaries, I'm not going to see it till it tries to go out. If it got in some other means, like removal media or something like that, I do get the detailed attack telemetry. Ultimately, I have centralized data that I can get a lot of detail on. It's not just about the packets. With the analytics, it's also about the metadata that's created around that packet information, and so that's going to be a key aspect as well, right? What additional insights and information can the systems provide me given the information that I have on my wire? So I'm going to drive faster detection, and I'm going to drive faster response. All right, so I have a thought for the day to kind of sum it all up. Can we play the clip? Uh-oh. You're familiar with the movie Night and Day, but I think that's exactly true, right? With packet capture, your odds of success go way up. Without it, I think that they're significantly hampered, and you're missing out on an opportunity to get to the end point or get to the end much, much faster. So with that, I want to hand off to Michael and let him talk a little bit more about how Endace works with Palo Alto networks to be able to get you there better, stronger, faster.
Yeah, thanks, David. I think having been in the industry as long as both of us have, I've really seen an evolution, right? When you look back, packet capture has been around a long time.
Oh, yeah.
And historically, from my perspective, it's always been a nice to have. I've worked with a lot of major carriers and large enterprises that use it pretty much on demand, right? When they see an incident, a performance degradation, they deploy sniffers to capture it and see what they could do. But again, that back to your point, very time consuming and very labor intensive. And typically the groups didn't share tools, right? So NetOps had their own tools. SecOps didn't even exist many years ago, right? Now it's probably the most funded part of the IT organization. And now with DevOps, right, you got a lot of this finger pointing, is it the app or is it the network? And if there's a security breach, all three of them are trying to decide where the issue is, right? And I think that's where packet capture is really evolving, because it's becoming that critical must-have, right? Protecting corporate brands is really everything, right? And abiding by compliance laws and things like that. You can't wait for a breach to happen again, which is what used to happen in the old days with an NPM solution. Performance would degrade, put the sniffers out, wait and see what happened. Now you can't wait for another threat to happen or another breach to happen. And as you've already covered, the sophistication of the breaches is really getting complex, right? It's taking much longer. There's a much wider spread. So to your point about endpoint security, it's one thing to identify a threat on a given box, but now how many other boxes were infected or touched by that box, right? So that's really where it's become critical, mission critical, to have the speed and the evidence and accuracy with packet data to really be confident in how far and wide a threat has really gone. But I want to share kind of some examples. I don't know how many folks here on the line really dig through breach threats every day, but just share a little bit of the complexity of some real-world breaches that have happened. So the first example I've got is the recent Olympic malware attack. This was known as Olympic Destroyer. Happened at the Winter Olympics here in 2018, earlier this year. Really effective attack, taking down a number of things much broader and wider than probably most people realize. So it originally targeted the Olympic Games website, where it was disrupting ticketing access. But it also took down Wi-Fi networks, key IT systems, including display screens and monitors for venues. It disabled ski gates and lifts, other infrastructure at the various venues, and ultimately it delayed the opening ceremony. Again, for those of us on this side of the world not noticing because of the time delay, but for folks in the stand and locally, definitely was a real live impact. The sophistication was really interesting on this attack because it had multiple levels of components, right? It had browser and system stealing credentials. It had data wipers to overwrite and hide where and what it had done. And it was really able to spread and attack more things through PSI exec and WMI capabilities that were embedded within part of the malware attack. It employed some interesting techniques that made it difficult for your common signature-based tools to find, including steganography, which is obfuscating malware inside of something else. In this case, it was an image. And it was able to self-reproduce and morph and spread across the network as it was stealing and reusing compromised credentials. Let's break it down a little further, though, and really understand kind of the steps of what happened there. So it was initially spoofed source email address of the South Korean National Counterterrorism Group. And it was an email address to the ice hockey at Pyeongchang 2018. But in the CC, it included hundreds of other targets, right? So anybody that received this email could click on it. There was an attached MS Word file. When you open the Word file, many of us have probably seen this in Word files or Excel spreadsheets. There would be a prompt to say, enable VB script. In this case, it went out to download a very innocuous looking image of, kind of some combination of a word stamp versus a localization thing. To get local script. And it was in that image that there was an embedded PowerShell script. And in that PowerShell script, that's where the steganography kicked off to then download encrypted malware to do other things and install them. Once the malware is installed, it then started harvesting credentials and spreading. So it was cloning, using those copied credentials, again, leveraging PS exec and WMI capabilities to spread across the network and impact various components. It was after it spread then, it really kicked into the destructive phase where a variety of things were happening. Files were being overwritten on local and network shares. Shadow files were being deleted. Windows system and security logs were being deleted. So this, again, where some of your endpoint security might be looking at log information, now all that's being removed and not being able to be flagged, or there'd be no evidence after the fact if the flag was triggered originally. Backups were being deleted, boot policies were altered, and ultimately services were being shut down, causing some of the outages that happened. And in the end, the worm was finally attempting to delete itself, again, covering up its tracks on any individual system. So again, making it that much harder for an investigation and response to really discover what had happened. Again, what the user saw, this was kind of the Word document that they saw. I'm sure all of us on this call have seen an attachment with a security warning about enabling content. When you clicked on the enable content, it was downloading then this image. Again, very official looking, kind of Microsoft-esque, with a stamp and seal. Again, nothing that a kind of a basic user would not expect to be suspicious, but it was in this embedded image where the malware then was kicked off and downloaded. Switch gears, kind of a different industry for ICS and SCADA security systems. Again, another type of attack that recently happened. This is the Industroyer attack. This was back in 2016. Hit the Kiev power grid. Very sophisticated attack as well. You know, duplicate or follow-on next-generation version of StuckNet. It took out the Ukraine power grid in December of 16, but it also impacted other critical infrastructures. This attack was focused on ICS systems, specifically Siemens and ABB devices. But it can easily be adapted, and we've seen it being adapted for other industrial environments. In this particular case, again, very modular in design, where it had 4 payload payments, the payload elements that were being downloaded to affect different types of the control systems, whether it was circuit breakers, relays, damaged devices over the ICS protocols. And again, this one had advanced evasion techniques to avoid detection of traditional methods, traditional search capabilities that might be in place on the ICS systems. Again, typical, as we've talked about a couple of times, this started with an initial infection, but then an extensive period of network scanning and mapping so that it could get a full picture of the entire infrastructure before triggering to do the destructive behavior. And ultimately, again, this included data wipers to cover its traces as well. In this particular case, the initial infection is interesting because it comes in with a main back door that may be able to be detected, but then it installs immediately an additional backdoor for the threat actor to then do additional things if it so chose. In this particular case, the additional tools again started the scanning and reconnaissance phase of the attack. And then it ultimately launched and did executed the 4 payloads that included, again, going after various specific elements in the ICS system and trying to take them out, overloading them with data, and ultimately then wiping out its data to cover its tracks in behind. Highlighting kind of the sequence of the events, though, as David mentioned earlier, the actual initial infection just happens within minutes or even seconds once it gets attached to a given system. It's then that the reconnaissance phase can take days to weeks, giving it time to spread across the network, to find and map out what all is in the environment. And if you miss that initial infection, unless you have some data that's happening of this reconnaissance phase, again, it makes it that much harder and that much more difficult to really understand how far and wide the threat has really taken across the infrastructure. And then at the end, once it's launched its attack and the destructive elements, then obviously lots of bad things could potentially be happening. And you'll want to take things out of band. But again, having that information of how far and wide it went can make a real difference to how destructive the results actually end up being. And this is where at Endace, we believe it all happens on the network. And as David mentioned earlier, certainly detecting at endpoints is key, but knowing that east-west information is really critical. I was reading a recent security article about a new concept called island hopping, where a lot of threats are happening on this east-west information, even from a compromised network to potentially partner companies, technology partners, things like that, where again it's hopping internally and laterally across the network by other means, and that kind of information is only going to be evident via the network traffic. So this is where Endace really comes into play, to give you that enterprise class visibility of what's happening. And it can be that single source of truth for all the different organizations, really, again, kind of tying together that discussion we talked about earlier. Originally, this is really helping the SecOps scenarios and doing the forensics and investigations, but a platform that can be used to help your NetOps and your DevOps teams as well really understand the performance issues, the application issues, really solving the whole gamut of IT challenges around application, network security, and health. So when going through a scenario like this, you know, you've got the steps of the attack, and this is again the model we just talked through on the Industroyer scenario. If you can identify the attack early, obviously the earlier identification, the better. But then having the tools to really understand the breadth of how far it went really can reduce the impact of any malicious behavior at this point. So when that destructive phase kicks in, if you've identified the threat and everybody, the system where the initial attack happened, and have been able to contain it because you know all the other nodes and IP addresses that infected box has gotten to, you've now ring-fenced very quickly and really minimized the destructive phase of any given threat. So this is where Endace really believes we can change the economics around the security challenge you're facing. With an Endace probe platform, we can be recording at line rate with absolutely zero packet loss. But what makes us unique in the industry compared to other packet capture solutions out there is we have the ability to host analytics tools you're already using on our platform. So we have what we call an open KVM environment where you can deploy instances of tools. Now, we've just given a couple examples in this scenario, specifically Palo Alto and Dynatrace as examples, but other tools that can run in KVM can be run here, and we can stream the real-time packet data to any of those tools for analysis. Meanwhile, maybe you make a change in a signature or a rule set or a configuration of a component running in your environment. You can then play back that data and validate the change that have happened. So I think David mentioned this earlier in the conversation, being able to do that verification of changes and updates that have been applied to a system can really make a difference in validating and ensuring your confidence in changes you made in your network. And then lastly, really tying it to other tools you may be using in your environment, whether it be AI tools, whether it be your SIMs, IBM, Splunk, whether it be just other tools you might be using to do analysis of things or app management. With our easy integration via our API, you can pivot from any event in many of these tools shown here to the Endace packet data to really speed those investigations. And this is the critical part, being able to identify a threat with the analytics tools you've chosen, and then get to raw packet information, really understand the breadth and names, really can speed that scenario up much greater.
Yeah, it really is these integrations that make it super advanced, right? I mean, I'm lacking for a good word here, but as I mentioned earlier, without the analytics, you really fall short, because anybody can capture packets. Heck, I can use Wireshark Ether or whatever you want to call it to capture packets, but can I actually provide the analysis on top of that? So your guys work with these partners and integrations is a fantastic capability.
Yeah, and what absolutely, and what we find is everybody's got a variety of tools in their environment. Nobody's homogeneous with one tool, and they need to have those different tools for within their infrastructure. And being able to leverage those and integrate and pivot to that really simplifies and streamlines that operational workflow that they're going through.
Absolutely.
So kind of working flow of the incident detection and response. If you're recording the traffic, you're hosting a platform, the tool raises an alert, and then really a quick pivot via HTML to look at Endace Vision, where you can then see traffic flows, conversation history, what all protocols and IP addresses are given a known infected box having conversations with, and get down to a PCAP level where you can understand usernames and passwords that may have been transacted. A scenario, a good use case where some IoT devices were hacked, and then through the packet data, we were able to understand what the password was reset to on these IoT devices. So instead of having to go out and physically manually reset them all, by knowing the newly changed password, we could quickly go back, and the analysts could then go back and reset the passwords, rechange things, and then do the proper updates to make sure the breach couldn't happen again. And again, moving the investigations from minutes to hours. So what are the solution components involved here? Well, the Endace Probe Analytics platform, an application dock capability, again, enabling you as a consumer to put your tools of choice on the probe, and again, reduce that overall cost of infrastructure by leveraging a common platform for your tools. With Palo Alto, using the next generation firewalls, and their VM series specifically can run on our box, but also enabling you to leverage and other capabilities Palo Alto provides. So working with the Palo Alto team just on a recent customer engagement yesterday, talking through how leveraging subscriptions to Wildfire and Autofocus and MindMeld, really, again, those are the analytics powerful capabilities within the Palo Alto suite of tools, all connected through the VM series, again, which can be run on our platform, really enable that analyst portion of what David talked about to really optimize identification of a threat, and then we'd provide the forensics data to understand the depth and breadth of a situation. So it expands your security coverage, right? Because you can leverage these probes throughout the network, deploying Palo Alto VMware in an IDS mode, and being able to do that surveillance and inspection of traffic, more of the east-west traffic. Obviously, you're going to have your big ingress and egress points and your big firewalls there trying to prevent things in. But once things potentially are in, you want to know how wide and far things got within your network. And did it get to other parts of your network that maybe even have more sensitive data or connected to potential partners you may be connected to as well. Allowing you to quickly and efficiently, with streamlined investigation workflows, get to conclusive and actionable evidence, right? Our newest and largest platform provides up to a petabyte of storage. And in that petabyte of storage, you can do an investigation in seconds, getting down to finding that needle in the haystack. So searching for a single IP address and a petabyte of data in under 30 seconds is a tremendous time savings for any analyst trying to understand how far and how many connections were made to a single IP address that you've now identified to be an infected element in your infrastructure. So really overall, reducing and it's speeding up the deployment costs and time. Just pictorially, again, we're not proposing and saying to replace any of your Palo Alto gear at the front. You use those boxes to protect the critical ingress and egress points. But with the Endace probe then deployed throughout your network to do monitoring in different locations. And one of our largest customers has over 1,500 probes deployed, inspecting at different elements in their network, getting key critical interfaces, really giving them the visibility to network traffic across their entire infrastructure. And then deploying potentially the VM series on top of our box to do that analytics piece and that inspection piece to really give you more visibility and more interrogation of traffic happening across your network. So here's how the workflow would look like. You typically have your Palo Alto user interface here from a panorama view. As you're looking at various events and logs and events that might have been triggered by signatures they have or configurations you've set up, you can then pivot directly from an incident from clicking on that incident down to the packet level view, where you'd be quickly taken to Endace Vision. At the top level view, you'd see a traffic breakdown, conversation history. The traffic view would give you detailed insights onto the flows of traffic and the types of traffic that are happening, the IP addresses that are being exchanged between those source and destination IPs, and all of it's in context, plus or minus a 5-minute window around that event. So you know what was happening before and you know what was happening after, giving you that insights in a real quick manner of the network level evidence to do an investigation. And ultimately getting down to a PCAP level where you can inspect line by line the protocols and the exchanges happening, showing everything that's happening at the packet level. And again, if this is encrypted traffic, doesn't matter. We can then play it back and decrypt it through something that, like a packet broker that would decrypt the data. And so again, if you need to get to that level of insight, you can, because of the playback capability saved and the full line rate traffic data being saved on the system. So hopefully this has given you a little bit of insight of how the power of Palo Alto and Endace can really combine to efficiently save your time in investigations and really give you that concrete, actionable evidence to know how far and wide a threat happened. So with that, I think I'll pause. I'll open it up for questions, and thank you for your time.
Looks like we have a few questions there, Michael. You want to grab the first one? Someone asked about the integrations that you guys have.
Yeah, thank you. So I can go back to that other slide, but we have a number of integrations with key SIM and network security tools. So Cisco, Palo Alto, and a couple of the AI vendors, Darktrace, Blue Vector. From a SIEM point of view, IBM QRadar, Splunk, all of them enable quick pivots from their interfaces to the Endace Vision packet data so that you can really speed those investigations. And what we're really seeing is a lot of our customers are wanting to have that traffic data combined with the analytics tools that they're already using, or the security tools they're already using, to really make those efficient investigations and really speed their analyst teams up.
Do you guys have an integrations or partners page on your website you could point people to for that?
Yeah, absolutely. If you just go to endace.com, the Palo Alto one, Palo Alto Networks, as you can see here on the slide, but our other partners are listed just one level above that under Endace Fusion.
Super.
David, I see one for you here. Are you seeing more attacks where attackers are covering their attacks by removing or doctoring log files? And can packet data help with that?
Yeah, I mean, your example that you gave a little earlier of the Olympic attack, right? That particular attack actually went out and removed source logs as well as part of its activities, or at least tried to, right? So the bad thing is, yes, they are happening. The good news, from my opinion, is if you're tracking the packet information, you've already got the communications information, you've got the metadata, and they can't erase their footprints on the network, right? You have your fingerprints, you have your footprints, if you will, that go across that network. And so once they hit that wire, there's nothing they can do short of encryption, right? Which then in and of itself will also create a flag. If you've got new encrypted traffic that you haven't seen before, your analytics should help you say, hey, this is bad. You can still collect the metadata and identify, what's going on, and then continue from there. So absolutely, we are seeing more of that. Especially with SSL and TLS on the increase, but at the same time, I think the packet information still provides a valuable level of information, again, from the base metadata all the way up through into the packet data as well.
Okay, David, I see one more for you here, actually, in the chat. You mentioned organizations are using packet capture to help reduce false positives. How are they doing that, and is it successful?
So yeah, let's talk about, you get an alert from your SIM or whatever you're using, log management, and it says something happened. Well, it's going off of primarily they're going off some kind of system logs that say something happened. But with the packet data added on top of that, you can see the communication that happened and pull out the payload of that packet to understand exactly what was delivered. So even if your log system says, okay, I have a connection from 1.1.1.1, right? I'll make this up. And it says that happened. You may not have the detail from that particular system on what actually transpired after that touch happened, whereas the packet data can tell you what actually was delivered to the endpoint, and then what happened after that, right? Was data actually moved? Was it just a remote connection being set up? Was there command and control? Those types of things. So absolutely, you can gather more information to create that context. And context isn't about just getting more data or big data. It's about getting better data and applicable data, right? So I can have a huge amount of data about something, and I use that term directly because data are bits and bytes without context. Machines work on data. People work on information. Information is data with context provided. Right? So ultimately, we're trying to turn lots of points of data into information by getting the intersection of all those pieces of data to create context and thus provide information. I hope that helps and wasn't too abstract, but absolutely.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Hopefully it answered the person's question.
So I think there's a question also about probes. Someone was looking on your website and said that you talked about hosting Palo Alto firewalls on the Endace probes, and asked a little bit more information about how you do that or what's going on there.
Yeah, so in short, the VM series Palo Alto instances can be launched in our application dock. Again, this is a real world scenario where it can be applied. So if you've got, let's say, 10 of our probes out there across your network, you've got Palo Alto physical boxes at the ingress and egress points, you can deploy their VM series at those remote locations where the probes are, giving you ability to run all the rules and the signature inspection of the Palo Alto VM series on the box. And this really enables you to take advantage of other capabilities Palo Alto offers, like their Wildfire, where you're looking for global and regional cloud-based zero-day malware, right? So that's what that Wildfire would be applying, or autofocus, which is acquiring, the contextual intelligence, giving you that correlation and aggregation of threats. Again, these are tools that can be connected via the VM series and SaaS-based services that Palo Alto offers. Again, having these inspection capabilities across the network, and then from each of them being able to pivot down to Endace vision. So if Palo finds a threat and then identifies the alert, and you pivot down to Endace, from the central manager of Endace, you can search across the entire network, across those 10 probes, and look at how far and wide that threat might have gotten, right? So really giving you that contextual analytics that you talked about, along with the packet level data, and then the capability to view across the infrastructure of all the data being captured in very quick user real-time kind of searches makes a tremendous difference for that security analyst.
Yeah, and I think also being able to actually embed the Palo Alto and other tools in your actual probe, right? That's a pretty rare, if not unique, capability that you guys have provided. Because normally it's I have to go over and get the packet information here, I have to move it someplace else, I have to go over to another tool. But now with your capability to actually embed partner tools in the probe, I can do it from right there.
Yeah, it's really trying to embrace the virtualization of so many tools out there that folks are using, and really enable them to reduce their total cost of ownership of their environment while enabling them with the richness of the packet information.
Absolutely.
I think that's all the questions I see, David, in the chat. Did I miss anything?
I don't see anything else either.
Okay.
Excellent.
Well, Renee, I'll turn it back to you then.
Yeah. Thank you both so very much. With that, I'd like to give a big thank you to our speakers, both Michael and David. But before we do conclude, if you're interested in learning more about this topic, please enter your information into the survey evaluation that will pop up on your screen at the end of this webinar. Also, please make note of our upcoming webinars and our past webinars by visiting www.fuelusergroup.org. You can also join us at one of our Spark Summits. Information for our upcoming events in Boston and New York is currently available on the Field website. Finally, a recording from today's webinar will soon be made available on the Field website. It's going to be within our Resource Center. So again, I'd like to thank our speakers and everyone online for attending the event today. There is a survey after this webinar for you to complete. We do thank you in advance for your feedback on that. So thank you again for attending today's webinar, and everyone have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.